On November 20th, 1982, the Stanford Cardinal and California Golden Bears played in one of, if not the most famous game in college football history. It's a game highlighted by a play that we've all seen a million times, simply known as the play. For this guy, the game was supposed to be the crowning moment of his college career, as he was on the verge of leading his team to a bowl game that they really had no business being in. But standing in his way was a team that had spoiled this very same opportunity for him multiple times before. And by the end of the night, they'd leave a lasting blemish on an all-time great's legendary college resume with the most famous play in college football history. To understand this story, we have to go back a few years to 1980. It was the first time that John Elway would step into Berkeley's Memorial Stadium, and his Stanford Cardinal needed a win to clinch a spot in the Peach Bowl. A year earlier, he had to watch helplessly from the sideline while his Cardinal lost at home to their most hated of rivals, denying them an all-important bowl game. Now, it should go without saying, but back then, bowls were taken a lot more seriously, and there was a lot of prestige that was thrust upon the bowl system itself. In fact, the number one goal for most college programs of the time was just to simply make a bowl game. That alone was seen as a massive accomplishment and a successful season. There were also far fewer bowls in total, meaning that many bowl-eligible teams would be left at home every single year, wishing that they had done just a little bit more. And that was the story for Stanford and Elway's sophomore year. They had locked up bowl eligibility with 2 games remaining on their schedule. A win in either game would likely give them that elusive bowl game that they were desperately seeking. But a loss to 4th-ranked USC suddenly put the spotlight on the big game in Berkeley's Memorial Stadium. Despite entering the game as sizable favorites, thanks to the Bears being a complete dumpster fire of a team, as well as being forced to start their 3rd-string quarterback, even with those things on their side, Stanford would ultimately fall, and it would be thanks to a massive mistake from Elway as he would fumble away his chance to lead his team on a game-winning drive. It was Elway's welcome to Memorial Stadium, and while he didn't know it at the time, his next appearance here was going to be an even bigger nightmare. One that'll get replayed almost more than any other in college football history. The following year, Elway and the Cardinal would finally enact some revenge with a 42-21 beatdown in Palo Alto. But thanks to Stanford having a wretched year, finishing with just 4 total wins on the season, they would be forced to sit at home during bowl season once again. This would shift all the focus to Elway's senior season and his final chance to lead his team to a bowl game. Now, entering his senior year, Elway was the expected number 1 overall pick in the upcoming NFL draft. At the time, there was absolutely nobody like him at the quarterback position, and NFL scouts everywhere had taken notice. He was more athletic than most quarterbacks of the time and had tremendous football IQ, but most importantly, his arm talent was next level. Elway threw the ball with pure violence. His throwing motion looked as though he was letting go a 100-mile-per-hour fastball every single time he threw the ball, but the precision and touch that he could add in there when need be made him a fascinating prospect. When you add on top of that, him having grown up around the game and having a father who was a really good football coach during his youth, and you had a generational prospect that was a lock to go number 1 come late April. So as he entered his senior season, the stage was set for an epic conclusion to an incredible college career. After a dominating victory in Week 1 over Purdue, Stanford would slip up massively in Week 2, losing to a San Jose State squad that was led by none other than Elway's own father, Jack Elway. The two had their own little fun and unique rivalry during John's college career, but that's a story for another day. Following the upset loss to the Spartans, Elway would lead his Cardinal to a comeback victory over the 13th-ranked Ohio State Buckeyes. The game was a certified gridiron classic in which Elway would lead a pair of fourth-quarter scoring drives to steal the upset for his Stanford squad inside the legendary horseshoe. And it was a glimpse into the future magic that Elway would become famous for. But after starting the season 3-1, trouble would strike in the form of back-to-back losses. First coming at the hands of 11th-ranked Arizona State, and then to the 14th-ranked USC Trojans. These losses were a huge setback that suddenly put Stanford at 3-3 with a very difficult schedule still to come. A win over a bad Wazoo team would give them a bit of confidence though, as they would head into their matchup with the number 2 team in the country, the 7-0 Washington Huskies. In their biggest moment of the season, Stanford would put forward their best of efforts. At one point, the Cardinal held a 20-point lead in the second half on the number 2 team in the country. In the end, it would be Cardinal star running back Vincent White that would finally put the dagger in the Huskies with an incredible punt return touchdown that gave Stanford their biggest win of the season and brought them one step closer to that ever-elusive bowl game that they had been chasing ever since Elway stepped on campus. The following weeks, however, would see the Cardinal fall twice, first to a mediocre Arizona Wildcat squad that had absolutely no problem putting up points on the Stanford defense. Then the following week, Stanford would leave it all out on the field in their bid to upset the 14th ranked and eventual Pac-10 champion UCLA Bruins. But despite giving their best of efforts, it wouldn't be enough, as UCLA would walk out with a 38-35 victory. Again, it was the Stanford defense that failed to get a big stop in the game's final moments when it was desperately needed. This left them with a 5-5 record, and now they needed a win in the final week of the season just to become bowl eligible. Now, the inside story here was that Stanford had already been notified that as long as they were able to win their final game and get to 6 wins, they would receive an invitation from the Hall of Fame Classic. Back then, bowl games were often arranged before the final week of the regular season. This was due to a variety of factors such as conference tie-ins, popularity, or even the location of the school, so it wasn't uncommon for schools to receive these types of notifications. Meanwhile, up in Berkeley, the Golden Bears were entering the big game with a 6-4 record on the year, having already locked up bowl eligibility for themselves. However, they were highly unlikely to receive an invitation to a bowl game, regardless of the outcome in the game against Stanford. This was in part due to them not having a signature win on their resume, but also due to their inability to perform in big games. Up to this point, the team as a whole had been a massive disappointment in those big games, going 0-4 and being outscored 154-38 over the course of those games. This included major beatdowns by Washington and USC, in which Cal would score just 7 points across the 2 games. So for them, this was their final opportunity to win a big game and spoil their most hated of rivals season in the process. This brings us to the big game and the day of November 20th, 1982. For the Golden Bears, this was the most important moment of the season, and their effort and intensity showed that immediately. For the entirety of the first half, they had Elway and the Cardinal offense completely locked up. Stanford's star quarterback was constantly being harassed, which led to the offense being completely stuck in the mud. Early on, it was the Bears' defense stepping up to the challenge and winning the battle 90% of the time. Offensively, meanwhile, Cal was slowly starting to find success, and just as the half was getting ready to come to a close, they would finally strike. In controversial fashion, of course.
30, 2:50 remaining in the half. A touchdown would really help things for the Bears as they go into the locker room. This is for Ford. Oh, great catch! They say he got it.
Now, this is a play that's been debated to death over the years between the two fan bases, but this all comes down to whether or not you believe the receiver maintains possession of the ball when he hits the ground. Now, I would argue that the Cal receiver likely does complete the process of this catch, though there's no definitive proof one way or another. However, based on the footage that we have available, I think it's more likely than not that this was just an incredible catch by the wide receiver rather than a bad call by the refs that handed Cal points. But I'm sure many Stanford fans would disagree. With that touchdown, the Bears would take a 10-0 lead into the half. At this point, it was clear if Elway and the Cardinal were going to win this game, they would need to find another gear. The good news for Stanford was their star quarterback would do just that early in the third quarter, during a drive that would see multiple obvious mistakes by the officials that both hurt and helped both teams. This would eventually lead to Elway and the Cardinal finally getting on the board, with Vincent White being found out in the flat for an easy walk-in touchdown. Suddenly, it was a one-score game, and momentum was quickly starting to shift. After another quick stop by the Stanford defense, the ball was right back in Elway's hands, and before you knew it, he was finding White in the flat again, who was outrunning everybody on his way to giving Stanford a 14-10 lead. But Cal wasn't going to go away quietly. However, their offense was struggling to finish off drives, and that would continue the next time they touched the ball, where they would be forced to settle for a field goal that cut the Cardinal lead to 1. The Bears defense would step up with a massive stop on the following drive, and just a few moments later, the Bears offense would finally break through.
11:36 to go. Stanford leading by 1. Brett Ford to the right. Story and Tuggle in the backfield. Gilbert to throw. Goes upstairs for the bomb. Receiver is out there. It's caught. Touchdown! Oh my goodness! What a bonanza! If you thought the Brett Ford catch was great, this one was better! A one-handed catch by Wes Hall, diving into the end zone!
With less than 12 minutes to play, Elway would need to get to work quickly, and now it was his team that was struggling to finish drives, as they would have to settle for a field goal that cut the Cal lead to 2. The Bears now had a chance to put this game away once and for all. However, quarterback Gail Gilbert would overthrow the great John Tuggle, and the Bears would be forced to punt the ball back to Elway. Once again, eerily similar to their last meeting in this venue 2 years ago, number 7 in white had a chance to lead his team to victory in that ever-elusive bowl game. Was this finally going to be his crowning moment?
2:39 remaining. 2nd and 8, 33-yard line. Elway to throw, and he is dropped. The ball comes loose. They'll call it a fumble. They'll call it a fumble, and the Bears have the ball.
The Bears defense had been harassing Stanford's star quarterback all day long, and once again, just like they did 2 years ago, they had forced a massive mistake that looked to be the potential game-sealing play. But the Stanford defense, well, they had other plans, as they would immediately force a 3-and-out, giving their guy one more chance at redemption. But after the Cardinal offense hit the field, it looked as though the damage was already done. Elway would immediately come out and throw a couple wild passes that nearly got picked off, and suddenly Stanford was looking at a 4th and 17 from their own 13-yard line. But believe it or not, this was when Elway was at his most dangerous.
There's no way they would even think about it. But here's the game. 4th and 17 back at the 13-yard line. Bears start to peel off. Elway back to throw inside his 5. He's got to get this one. Looks way downfield. He got it. It is complete at the 42-yard line. He did it.
One more perfect ball from Elway and an unexpected run that completely caught the Bears defense off guard, put Stanford in field goal range with just 23 seconds left on the clock. Stanford would quickly run another play to set their kicker up from the right hash mark, but then one of the biggest mistakes in college football history was made. Elway would call Stanford's final timeout immediately after the play was over, just as head coach Paul Wiggins had instructed. The problem was there was still 8 seconds left on the clock, and that was simply far too much time for a 35-yard field goal. Now, the argument given for the early timeout is simply just in case of a bad snap. In such a case, they would in theory have enough time to throw the ball away and still have another attempt at the field goal. But any way you choose to look at it, this single yet very costly mistake allowed for the most wild finish in college football history to officially become reality. Mark Harmon would go on to connect on the 35-yard field goal, and the clock would show 4 seconds left. The Stanford contingent celebrated as though they had just won the national championship, and it seemed as though Elway had finally checked the last box off of his college resume. But there was still one final play left to go, a play that would become so famous it is simply remembered in college football lore as the play.
All right, here we go with the kickoff. Harmon will probably try to squib it, and he does. Ball comes loose, and the Bears have to get out of bounds. Rodgers along the sideline, another one. They're still in deep trouble at midfield. They tried to do a couple of... The ball is still loose as they get it to Rodgers. They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. He's gone into the end zone. Will it count? The Bears have scored, but the bands are out on the field. There were flags all over the place. Wait and see what happens. We don't know who won the game.
In the immediate aftermath of the play, the entire field was covered in chaos, with nobody being sure what had actually just taken place. This became even more clear as time went by without an official ruling from the referees, who were now huddled up and being barked at from both sides of the field. Meanwhile, even the scoreboard was still showing Stanford ahead by 1. With replay review still being 20 plus years away, the officials on the field had to dissect and somehow come up with a ruling for the final play all on their own. Now, the details of the play have been debated to death over the years, with most of the debate centered around laterals 3 and 5, but you really only have to look as far as lateral number 3, in which you can see Dwight Gardner's knee clearly touching the ground before he releases the ball, and it's not even particularly close. The officials, however, would miss this critical detail, and the rest, as they say, is history. The officiating crew would eventually go on to rule the play a touchdown, and with that, the game was over. In the blink of an eye, John Elway went from being on the verge of accomplishing the very goal his team had been chasing ever since he stepped on campus, to it all coming to an abrupt end to the same team in the same venue where he watched it all happen just 2 years earlier. When he and the Cardinal offense walked off the field for the final time, they felt all but guaranteed a win in one final game together. But just a few moments later, it was all ripped away, and a future all-time great's college career was ended, having never reached the heights once thought possible. Elway would leave Stanford with no team accolades. They were never a team with championship potential, they never came close to a Pac-10 title, and they never even made it to a bowl game. After the big game, Elway would famously be quoted saying that the call by the officials to allow the play to stand was an insult to college football, and how it ruined his final game at Stanford. For Elway, this game, and really this season as a whole, was supposed to be his crowning moment where he finally led his team to the one thing that they'd been chasing after for years. After all, he was never going to win the Heisman Trophy. Moment, Elway would see his college career come to an abrupt end thanks to the most famous play in college football history. But you can't feel too bad for the guy, as he went on to win 2 Super Bowls on his way to becoming a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and then, just for fun after he hung up the cleats, he went on to build one of the best football teams of the past 15 years from the front office. But the ending to Elway's college career will forever be marred by a single play so legendary it shall simply forever be known as the play.